live. 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's talk, the fourth talk, the third day of the Northumbrian Dark Sky Festival. Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's talk, the fourth talk, the third day. I'm talking to myself. That's interesting. Sorry about that. That was a bit confusing. I was talking and it was coming out of my phone as well. But welcome. Tonight's guest is Ian Ridpath, the noted astronomy author, some say a legend. And he will be telling us a magical story about the constellations, the stories of the stars. Ian will be talking for about 45 minutes or so, and we'll stick around for some questions and answers afterwards. I will, of course, be looking at the YouTube chat and answering any questions that I can answer and writing some down for Ian towards the end of the session today. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do, just to get us started off on this talk, is to just tell you a little bit about the Northumberland Dark Sky Festival. So if you bear with me while I just fire that up. Share screen, and it's that one. I think this is the right one. There we go. So as I said, welcome. This is the first official Northumberland Dark Sky Festival, and it's all online, obviously, because of the COVID pandemic, which is affecting us all pretty badly. But the good thing for us is that we are able to get some fantastic speakers from around the world and around the UK to join us. And we're able to host events with hundreds of people in them, which is great. We couldn't do that at the observatories. But obviously, we do hope that perhaps next year you'll be able to come and visit us and see our wonderful dark sky park that we have. My name is Roy. And I'm your host for this evening. So a little bit of what the festival is all about. Basically, it's the 4 observatories in Northumberland have come together. We've teamed up to collaborate on this online festival all week. So that's the Kielder Observatory, which you can see there. And we've got the Stonehof Observatory, Stonehof Astronomy, if you want to look for them on Facebook. And then there is the Twice Brood Observatory, which is right next to the Sill Visitor Centre, right in the heart of Northumberland's National Park. And finally, the observatory that I helped to run and create, the Battlesteads Observatory in the village of Wark. And it's just fantastic for us all to come together. And we hope that as soon as you're allowed to travel, you can come and see us. I can see a lot of you now are using the YouTube live chat. That's fantastic. Please do ask questions. What we found in the last few days is as questions are being asked, sometimes other people in the chat are answering them, which is fantastic and really helpful. Be kind in your comments, please. That's the other thing to ask. It's the final day of the CPRE star count. I don't know what it's like over there where you are, but the weather here is awful. It's rainy and cloudy, so I won't be able to do that tonight. But if you can get outside at any point tonight and see Orion, the constellation of Orion, there's 4 stars in the corner of Orion. And if you can imagine a rectangle drawn out by those 4 stars, then you're wanting to count all the stars in the middle of that rectangle and submit your count to the CPRE Star Count website, which is there. This video is being recorded, so you can come back and check that link later, or you can just Google CPRE Star Count and it will come up. To get the very best results, you do want to let your eyes become dark adapted. So about 10 minutes, maybe 20, ideally 20 minutes is ideal. I mean, it is cold out there, so if you can last 20 minutes before your eyes get dark, then that's great. Do the count, submit it, and you've just taken part in some great citizen science. One of the things, finally, that we'd like to promote and talk about when we talk about any kind of astronomy is dark skies and the IDA, the International Dark Sky Association. If you want to get really stuck in with dark skies, with activism, or join clubs, or even just join the International Dark Sky Association, then head over to that particular website and see what's on offer. Okay, so I'm going to close this window down and I'm going to introduce Ian, and I think that's worked. I think we're now seeing Ian. Yes, we are. And if that's okay with you, and if you're ready to go, I shall mute my microphone and hand over to you.
Well, good evening, Roy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a great honour to be participating in the Northumberland Dark Skies Festival. Unfortunately, like you, I've got a lot of rain here. Just to explain, I'm actually in West London. I hope I'll get a chance to come up and see you in person one day, but it's being done remotely at the moment. But I'm in West London, and by curious chance, I am right next to Syon Park, which is the Duke of Northumberland's London home. So I'm actually only a few hundred yards away from where Thomas Harriot famously made his first observations of the moon and stars through a telescope. So I'm not quite in Northumberland, but I can at least say the Duke of Northumberland has a house quite near to me. Now, tonight I'm going to be telling you some tall stories, and they're the myths of the Greeks and the Romans that have come down to us from a couple of thousand years ago, which was a time when, of course, the skies were very dark indeed, and they made these constellation patterns. Now, many of the characters from those old myths were visualized in the sky as patterns of stars: Taurus the bull, Cygnus the swan, Perseus and Andromeda, and so on. And those are names that you'll still find on star charts even today. So the sky became a picture book to illustrate scenes from mythology. And those star patterns were the basis of our modern system of constellations. And for this talk, I've selected some of my favorite constellation stories that were told by the ancient Greek and Roman writers. And these are the constellations that we'll be covering. And I'll be showing you how various artists have visualized the myths behind them. And we'll also look at the constellations themselves and some of the objects they contain: stars, galaxies, nebulae, which have true stories that are every bit as fantastic as the old myths. I'm going to start with one of the most magnificent and easily recognized constellations, Orion, which has already been mentioned, very well placed in the evening sky at the moment. Now, in mythology, Orion was a giant hunter armed with a club and a lion's pelt for a shield. And that's how the ancient Greeks imagined him in the sky. And he was said to have been a son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. And as a result, he had the ability to walk on water. And I suppose if you were looking out to sea at night and Orion was hovering just above the horizon, then it would look as though he was walking on the water. So perhaps this is a case where the sky has influenced the myth. And here the artist Nicolas Poussin shows him as a true giant, and you can see that the humans next to him just about come up to his knees. Now, the painting's called Blind Orion Searching for the Rising Sun. But why was he blind? Why was he searching for the rising sun? Well, the story is that on one of the Greek islands, he violated the daughter of the local king. And I should warn you, there's a lot of this kind of stuff in Greek mythology. It's all rather post-watershed stuff, even though we're not past the watershed. But as a punishment, the king made Orion blind. Now, Orion was told by an oracle that the rays of the rising sun would restore his sight. But he needed a guide to help him find his way. So here's Orion with his young guide on his shoulders, heading east in search of the sunrise. And in the clouds above him is the goddess Artemis, following his progress. Now, what's particularly ironic about this story, of course, is that looking at the sun is actually very damaging to your eyes. We always tell you, don't look at the sun because you can blind yourself. And that's completely the opposite of the myth here. But of course, that's the nature of myths. They're not constrained by reality. Well, the cure worked and Orion regained his sight, but he didn't learn his lesson. His ego remained undiminished, and this led to his final downfall. He boasted to Artemis, the goddess of hunting, that he could kill any living creature. Well, Mother Earth decided that Orion was getting too big for his boots, so she produced a huge scorpion which stung him to death, although some say it was Artemis herself who killed him. But either way, Artemis grieved for him, and here she is with his corpse and her twin brother Apollo. Now, I said Artemis, but the title of this painting calls her Diana. And this is a confusion you come across repeatedly in ancient mythology. The Greeks and the Romans had much the same characters, but often with different names. For example, the Greek god Zeus was the same as the Roman Jupiter. Poseidon was the equivalent of Neptune, and the Greek goddess Artemis was known to the Romans as Diana. So Artemis and Diana are the same person, just with a different name. And we'll come across this business of dual identity again later on. Well, Artemis asked Zeus to immortalize Orion in the sky as a constellation, which he did. But as well as Orion, Zeus also put Orion's nemesis, the Scorpion, among the stars as the constellation Scorpius. And he kept the two of them apart by putting them on opposite sides of the sky. So you see Orion in winter and Scorpius in summer. And as the Earth turns, Orion appears to move across the sky, and following him are his two dogs in the form of the constellations Canis Major and Canis Minor. And Canis Major contains the brightest star in the entire night sky, Sirius, popularly known as the dog star, which marks his snout. And whenever you look out on a clear night at the moment, you'll see a bright star twinkling low down in the south, and that's Sirius. And the smaller dog is Canis Minor, and it contains Procyon, which is another very bright star, and that's right in the middle of the dog's body. So even if you don't know the shape of these constellations, you'll have no difficulty spotting their brightest stars. Well, let's have a look at the stars of Orion. Well, if you've been doing the star count, you should be familiar with this by now, but this is a real photograph of Orion, not a computer graphic. It was taken by an amateur astronomer in Austria called Peter Wienerreuter. And he's used a special filter to make the images of the bright stars bigger and easier to see. Now let's imagine we're going outside for a better look. And it's not too difficult to make out the outline of a human figure here. And the line of three stars in the center marking his belt is particularly easy to identify. It's probably one of the best known features in the sky after the plough. And Taurus the bull is off up there to the right, and we'll be looking at him a little bit later on. Now, I think you can see that the star at the top left of Orion appears rather orange. Now, that's not a photographic effect. It really is that color. And I don't know if you're a beginner, I don't know if you've ever noticed that not all stars are white. And this is an important fact because the color of a star tells us its temperature. The hottest ones are the bluest and the coolest ones the reddest. Now, I know this is the opposite of the colors on the taps in your sink. You expect the blue tap to be cold and the red one to be hot. But if you heat something up, the range of color temperatures goes from red hot through white hot to blue hot. So stars do have colors, and the color is a kind of a visual thermometer, with the reddest stars being the coolest and the blue ones the hottest. And this star, you'll probably know, is called Betelgeuse, or Betelgeuse if you're a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it's the type of star known as a red giant, a red supergiant, far bigger and brighter than the sun. And our sun is just an average star. Now, as stars get older, they swell up in size and they also get cooler and redder. And that's what's happened to Betelgeuse. And it's estimated to be several hundred times the diameter of our sun. So if Betelgeuse was placed where the sun is, we would lie inside it, as you see on this diagram. That grey circle shows the size of the Earth's orbit around the sun compared with Betelgeuse. And as you can see, Betelgeuse is over twice the diameter of the Earth's orbit. And we'll be looking at some more examples of giant red stars later on. Well, going back to Orion, the star at the bottom right is called Rigel. And this appears bluish in color because it's much hotter than the sun. In fact, all the bright stars in Orion, apart from Betelgeuse, are hotter and bluer than the sun, but eventually they too will evolve into red giants like Betelgeuse. Now, hanging from Orion's belt is his sword, and even with the naked eye, you'll see that this area looks fuzzy. And that's because there's a huge cloud of glowing gas here called the Orion Nebula. And nebula is the Latin word for mist or fog. And this is it photographed by the Hubble Space Telescope. And it's like a fantastic abstract painting with swirls of gas lit up by the stars that have been born within it. Because it's in clouds of gas like this where stars form. And what happens is that knots of gas start to shrink under the inward pull of gravity, and eventually they become so dense and hot at their centers that nuclear reactions switch on. And these reactions continue to power the stars throughout their lives. So stars are really vast nuclear reactors, and that includes the sun. And it's the heat and light from the nuclear reactor of the sun that keeps us alive on Earth. Now, we can see some of the bright new stars in this boxed region at the center of the nebula, but there's a lot more going on around here that we can't see because it's concealed by the gas and the dust. But if we look at infrared wavelengths, we can cut through that gas and dust, and as we zoom in, we can see hundreds of tiny dots, which are actually stars in the process of formation. They're called protostars. So there's a whole swarm of stars being born in the Orion Nebula, and it's happening right in front of our eyes. And not just stars. These things aren't flying saucers. They're disks of dust and gas around some of the young stars in the Orion Nebula, photographed by the Hubble Space Telescope. And this is how planetary systems are thought to form, coalescing from disks of material left over around young stars. So when we look at the Orion Nebula, it's like turning back the clock 4.5 billion years to watch a replay of the birth of our own sun and the planetary system in which we live. Well, let's move on now to Taurus the bull, which lies next to Orion in the winter sky. It's said to be one of the disguises adopted by the god Zeus. He was always turning himself into animals to abduct and seduce pretty young things who took his fancy. Now, only the front half of the bull is shown among the stars, and we'll see why in a moment. Well, the girl he had his eye on was Europa. She was the daughter of the king of Tyre, which is a place on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean in present-day Lebanon. Well, being a god, Zeus couldn't just show himself openly, so according to the story, he mingled with the king's cattle in the form of a handsome white bull. Well, Europa and her friends were very taken with this new addition to the herd. They petted it and placed garlands of flowers around its neck, and it seemed so friendly that Europa climbed onto its back, as we see in the picture here. And she still didn't suspect anything as the bull paddled into the surf with her, but she was startled when it suddenly began swimming out to sea. And here she is being carried off on the bull's back, as imagined by a French artist called Noël Nicolas Coypel. Now, excuse me, there's an awful lot going on in this picture, so much so that you might find it difficult to spot Europa at first, but she's over to the left of center on the white bull. And in the background at the right, you can see Neptune with his trident sending out dolphins who were his messengers. And around the bull, there are putti or cherubs goading it on, winds blowing it, and various sea nymphs in compromising positions. And perhaps you can now see why only half the bull is shown in the sky. It's because the other half is supposed to be beneath the waves. Well, Rembrandt also painted the abduction of Europa, but he made it more of a northern scene with a much lusher landscape and heavy dresses of the sort that you might expect to find in northern Europe rather than on the shores of the Mediterranean. But the upshot of it all was that the bull swam with Europa to Crete, where Zeus revealed his true identity and had his way with her. Now, this is how Taurus appears in the sky. The face of the bull is marked by a V-shaped group of stars, and he has long horns, each with a star at its tip. And there's a hazy patch just above the bull, which you can see with the naked eye. And this is a cluster of stars called the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters. And there's a hazy patch just above the bull. Whoops, excuse me. There we are. There's a sorry. And here's a painting of the Seven Sisters by an American artist called Elihu Vedder, and which I will come onto in a moment. Now, in mythology, they were the seven daughters of Atlas, who was one of the most ancient Greek gods. However, only 6 stars are easily seen with the naked eye, and a couple of stories have grown up to try to explain the missing Pleiad, which I won't go into, but whoever she was, this rather beautiful figure study imagines her seeming to fly away, a bit like Peter Pan in a pantomime, leaving her sisters dancing away in the misty distance in the lower right of the picture there. By the way, do you know what the Japanese name for the Pleiades is? It's Subaru. Have you ever noticed the badge on Subaru cars? That's supposed to be the Pleiades, but it's only got 6 stars, so they've lost a Pleiad too. Well, in reality, there are many more than 7 stars in the cluster, and if you turn binoculars on it, you can see several dozen, and telescopes show hundreds. And in fact, on long exposures like this one, you can see there's a haziness around the stars. And it used to be thought that this was the remains of the cloud the stars formed from. But that should all have dispersed long ago. So it now seems that all this haziness is an entirely unrelated cloud, which the stars just happen to be drifting through as they move through space. But either way, the result's very pretty. Now let's go back to Taurus and look at the face of the bull. The V-shaped group of stars making up the bull's face is another cluster called the Hyades, after another group of nymphs. And it's an older cluster than the Pleiades, so the stars have had more time to drift apart. And the brightest star here is called Aldebaran, but it's closer to us than the cluster, and it just happens to lie in the same line of sight by chance. So it isn't actually a member of the Hyades at all. It just looks that way. And Aldebaran marks the bull's eye, and it's another red giant, but the color's not very strong. And even though astronomers call them red giants, they're really more of a pale orange. And next to the tip of the bull's horn is one of the most remarkable objects in the entire sky. It's called the Crab Nebula, and it's the remains of a star that exploded nearly 1,000 years ago. Now, it's too faint to see with the naked eye, but through the Hubble Space Telescope, this is how the wreckage looks. The explosion was seen from Earth back in the year 1054, and there are records from that time of a brilliant new star appearing at this spot for many months before finally fading away. And it was named the Crab Nebula by an Irish astronomer called Lord Rosse in 1844, who thought that its various filaments looked like the legs of a crab, although I can't say I've ever seen much similarity myself. And astronomers call this kind of event a supernova, and it happens only to the biggest and the heaviest stars as follows. After a massive star has swollen up into a red supergiant, it becomes unstable at the center and explodes in a flash of blinding radiance. And the outer layers are shattered and spewed out into space, where they are eventually collected up into new stars and planets. So there's a continual recycling of atoms through the interiors of stars and back out into space again. And that means that we all contain atoms that were created in the supernova explosions of stars that lived and died before the sun was born. And at the center of the Crab Nebula is the core of the star that exploded. And I'm going to zoom in on the area in that yellow box there. And there it is. Now, on this picture, it looks just like any of the other stars scattered around, but in fact, they're just foreground stars that happen to lie in the same direction, and they're nothing to do with the nebula. But the star I've arrowed is very different from those other stars. It's been crushed by the explosion into an incredibly dense object called a pulsar, about 15 or 20 miles across, which is spinning 30 times a second. And every time it spins, a beam of radio energy sweeps across us like the beam from a lighthouse. And if you record the pulses with a radio telescope, and play them back, this is what it sounds like. "30 times a second. Imagine something the size of Staten Island or the Isle of Wight spinning around that fast. Now, a massive star like Betelgeuse and Orion might well become a supernova in the next 1,000 years or so. And when it does, it will light up the night sky like the moon. Well, fortunately, our sun won't become a supernova because it's not massive enough. Stars like the sun die much more quietly, and I'll show you an example of what will happen to the sun a bit later on. Now we come to one of the most famous of all Greek myths, the story of Perseus and Andromeda. Well, the ancient Greeks imagined Perseus in the sky, brandishing his sword and carrying the decapitated head of Medusa the Gorgon, which are essential parts of the famous story in which he is the action man hero. Now, Perseus was another of the illegitimate offspring of the god Zeus, and in this case, the unmarried mother was Danae, the daughter of the king of Argos. And this time, Zeus didn't disguise himself as an animal to make his approach, but he impregnated her in the form of a shower of golden rain. And Danae and the shower of gold was a popular subject for artists. Titian, in particular, painted it several times, and this is the version in the Prado. And this artist has visualized the gold as a shower of coins, so it looks as though she's been playing the slot machines at Las Vegas and she's won the jackpot. Well, when he grew up, Perseus was sent on a do-or-die mission to bring back the head of Medusa the Gorgon. Now, she was a monstrous creature with snakes for hair and an evil gaze that turned men to stone, and it looked like a one-way ticket to oblivion for Perseus. But because he was the son of Zeus, the gods set out to help him. Hermes gave him winged sandals, which he's putting on here. Hades, the god of the underworld, gave him a helmet of invisibility, and the sea nymph at the right is holding out a pouch to put the Gorgon's head in. And he was also given a razor-sharp sword and a highly polished shield. And you probably know the story. Perseus sneaked up on Medusa while she was asleep, looking at her reflection in his shield, lopped off her head with one swing of the sword, and rapidly beat a retreat with her head in his bag. And this was how Rubens visualized the Gorgon's severed head. And I think this is a splendidly evil picture. It's positively writhing with snakes and worms and all sorts of nasty, creepy crawlies, enough to give you the shivers. And this is how Perseus looks in the sky. It's not a particularly obvious constellation, but I'll draw in the main outline for you. Now, its brightest star is this one called Murphak, but its most interesting star is this one. It's called Algol, which comes from the Arabic al-Ghul, meaning the ghoul or the demon, and it marks the head of Medusa. And the Arabs got the idea of this being the demon's head from the Greeks, and we've now adopted the Arabic name for it. And in fact, quite a number of our star names are Arabic in origin, because Greek astronomical knowledge was preserved by the Arabs and passed on to us 1,000 or so years ago with Arabic additions. Now, one particularly attractive sight is up here in the hand that's holding his sword. It's a pair of star clusters called the double cluster. You can just make them out with the naked eye as a brighter knot in the Milky Way, which runs through here. And through binoculars, they're a beautiful sight. Each of them appears about the same size as the full moon. And as you can probably see, the one on the left is more scattered, and there are a few orange stars dotted around. These are stars growing old and swelling into red giants and supergiants, which hasn't yet happened in the cluster at the right. And if you don't know where it is, perhaps you can, on a clear night, you can get someone to help show you where it is and to find it. It's a beautiful sight. Well, let's move on now to the second part of our story. While Perseus was off beheading Medusa in North Africa, a beautiful young princess called Andromeda was finding herself in a spot of bother on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. And the constellation depicts her predicament, chained up and looking very scared because she's about to be eaten alive by a sea monster. And the cause of all this trouble was her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, who was a very vain woman. Now, Cassiopeia is represented by the constellation, and so too is Andromeda's father, King Cepheus, but he's a much more sketchy character, and I think it was that Cassiopeia who wore the trousers in this relationship. Now, in the sky, she's depicted sitting in a chair and fussing with her hair. And one day she declared that, oh my, she really did think she was prettier than the sea nymphs. Well, as we saw in the case of Orion, the gods were quick to punish hubris among mere mortals, and Poseidon, the sea god, sent a monster to ravage her country's coastline. And the monster is represented by the constellation Cetus, and it makes the great white shark from Jaws look understated by comparison. And in fact, constellations associated with the whole Perseus and Andromeda myth take up a large part of the northern sky, so the Greeks really went to town on this one. Now, everyone in the land was terrified by the monster and demanded that the king do something to get rid of it. Well, Cepheus and Cassiopeia consulted an oracle, which told them that the only answer was to sacrifice their daughter to the monster. So, through no fault of her own, Andromeda found herself chained to a rock outside the port of Jaffa, which is near the modern Tel Aviv in Israel. Now, there are lots of paintings showing Andromeda chained to the rock. It was an opportunity for artists to thrill their viewers with a picture of a naked girl in mortal danger, particularly in the Victorian era when these two were painted. Well, it looked as though Andromeda had had her chips until Perseus happened to fly past on his way back from beheading Medusa. And this panorama shows the events unfolding. At the left, we see Andromeda chained up, with her family and friends weeping for her in the foreground. But at top right, here's Perseus flying in. And at the center, he's descended and is setting about the monster with his sword. And finally, at bottom right, he's being celebrated as a hero. Hurrah, hurrah. It's like several frames of a cartoon strip combined into one narrative picture. Now, what the previous picture doesn't show is that before he got to work, Perseus negotiated a deal with Andromeda's parents. He said, if I kill the monster, do I get the girl? Well, of course, they readily agreed. So now here he is with the head of the monster lying dead in the water at his feet. And he's pointing to Andromeda and saying, right, I've done the job. Now I want my reward. And Cassiopeia and Cepheus are hugging him and kissing his hands in gratitude and saying, yes, anything, anything. And another reason I've included this picture is that it illustrates a common misunderstanding. Now, in the background, you see Pegasus, the winged horse. Now, a lot of artists painted Perseus flying on the back of Pegasus, but no, he didn't. As we've seen, Perseus had winged sandals, so he didn't need a flying horse. The flying horse was actually ridden by someone else entirely. His name was Bellerophon, but he's not part of the Perseus and Andromeda myth, and he's not commemorated by a constellation. Let's have a look now at the stars of Andromeda. It's really little more than a couple of crooked lines representing her body, with the head at the lower right. However, the constellation does contain one of the most outstanding objects in the sky. If you go 2 stars along from the head and then 2 up, you come to this fuzzy, elongated patch, which is the Andromeda galaxy. It's a spiral of billions of stars, very similar to the galaxy in which we live. And you can just glimpse it with the naked eye on clear nights. It's still visible early in the evening sky at the moment, and it's easy to spot through binoculars. And this is it on a long exposure photograph. Now, it looks elongated, but that's because we're seeing it almost side on, like a tilted plate. If we could see it face on, it would look spiral in shape, like a Catherine wheel. And the little points dotted all over the picture are foreground stars in our own galaxy. And the Andromeda galaxy is way beyond them. It's about 2.5 million light years away, which means that the light now reaching us started out 2.5 million years ago when our ape-like ancestors were roaming the plains of Africa. It's the most distant object you can see with the naked eye. And when you look at it, you wonder if there's someone on a planet going around one of those stars in there, looking back at you. Now, astronomers have found that our galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy are approaching each other. It's a very slow process, and you won't notice any difference during a human lifetime, but one day they will actually merge. And this won't happen for billions of years yet, and I emphasize not even millions, but billions of years. And here's a computer simulation made by a Canadian astronomer called John Jubinski of how it's expected to go. Our own galaxy enters from below and passes the Andromeda galaxy. Stars and gas are drawn out into long, flowing arms by gravity, and our sun may be among those stars. And then the two galaxies fall back together again, and their nuclei orbit each other, and poof, waves of stars are thrown out as the galaxies merge. And the final result will probably be a large, shapeless elliptical galaxy like this real one photographed through the Hubble Space Telescope. And this galaxy shown here is thought to be the result of a merger between two spirals sometime in the past. Well, the next chapter of our storybook is about Cygnus the Swan. It's another disguise of Zeus. And on this old illustration, we see it flanked by a lizard and a harp. They're separate constellations, which you can ignore for now, although I'll come back to the harp in our next chapter. Well, according to the myth, Zeus seduced Queen Lyra of Sparta in the guise of a swan. And to complicate matters, her husband also made love to her that same night. And in due course, she laid 2 eggs, which, amazingly enough, doesn't seem to have been considered suspicious by anyone. But both the eggs were double yolkers. From one hatched the twins Castor and Pollux, and from the other came Helen of Troy and her sister Clytemnestra. Now, Lyra and the Swan is another of those scenes that was popular with artists, and the one on the screen here is a copy of an original by Leonardo da Vinci. And at the bottom left are the 2 sets of twins emerging from the 2 eggs, while Lyra embraces the swan and smiles down on the twins with maternal pride. Now, in the sky, we see Cygnus flying along the starry band of the Milky Way, and it appears almost overhead in the summer. And it's easy enough to trace the outline of the swan, its long neck, its wings, and the stubby tail. And as you can see, the constellation forms a distinct cross shape, and a popular alternative name is the Northern Cross. It's actually much bigger and better than the more famous Southern Cross, although we don't tell the Australians that. Now, its brightest star is this one up at the top, which marks the swan's tail. And it's called Deneb, which is another name that comes from Arabic. And there's an object near it with a shape that should look familiar. It's another of these glowing gas clouds. And although you can barely see it through binoculars, it shows up well on color photographs. And I'll zoom in on it. It's called the North America Nebula, and I think you can see why. There's a beautiful Gulf of Mexico shape, and although it gets a bit vague up towards Canada, I think you'll agree that there's a remarkable resemblance to the continent of North America. And this is simply a chance arrangement of light and dark clouds of gas and dust in our galaxy. Now, partway down the neck of the swan is an even more remarkable object, a black hole called Cygnus X1. Now, black holes are thought to be formed when the most massive stars of all explode as supernovae. Now, you remember I talked about the supernova that formed the Crab Nebula in Taurus. Well, in the case of the biggest and the heaviest stars, the explosion is even more powerful than the one in the Crab Nebula. The explosion compresses the core of the star so that it collapses in on itself. And as it gets smaller and denser, its gravitational pull gets stronger until it becomes so strong that not even the star's own light can escape. So the star vanishes from view. However, things can fall in, so it acts like a hole in space, hence a black hole. And that's what we've got here. Well, by definition, you can't see a black hole. So how do we know it's there? Well, this one is orbiting another star, which we can see. And I've got a little animation here to show you what's happening. The black hole is orbiting a large blue star, and gas is streaming off that star onto a disk around the black hole. And as the gas from that disk falls towards the black hole, it becomes intensely hot and emits X-rays, which can be detected by satellites in space. And it's called Cygnus X1 because it was the first X-ray source to be found in Cygnus. And we're now pretty sure that it's caused by superhot gas falling into a black hole. Now, earlier I mentioned the harp next to Cygnus, and it's actually the constellation Lyra, and it represents the instrument played by the legendary musician Orpheus. Now, the instrument is said to have been made by the god Hermes, who gave it 7 strings, one for each star of the Pleiades, although the artist here has got it wrong by showing 8. Well, Orpheus was such a wonderful musician that he was supposedly able to charm wild animals with his songs. And his great love was the nymph Eurydice, who met a tragic death. One day, while she was dancing to his music, she was bitten on the foot by a snake and died. Now, Nicholas Poussin imagines the scene for us here. There's Eurydice in the center, recoiling from the snake on the grass beside her, while Orpheus is still playing away on his lyre without noticing anything wrong. Typical man. Well, Orpheus was heartbroken at losing Eurydice, so he went down to the underworld, which was the home of the dead, to plead for her return. And he played and he sang so persuasively that he softened even the cold heart of Hades, the god of the underworld, and his wife Persephone, who are both seen at the right of the picture here in the darkness. And they agreed to let him take Eurydice back to the land of the living, but on one condition. He mustn't look round until the two of them were safely back in daylight. Well, Orpheus in the underworld is one of the best known stories of Greek mythology, and so you probably know what's coming. Orpheus was nearly back at the surface when finally his nerve gave out. He glanced behind him to check that Eurydice really was still following him, and in that instant, he lost her forever. After that, he became a total misery. He roamed the countryside, singing mournfully. Many women offered themselves to him, but he turned them all down, and in the end, they got so fed up with him, they ganged up and killed him. A sad end. Well, the lyre was placed in the sky as his memorial, and we see it as the constellation Lyra. And here's Lyra in the sky. It's a nice, compact little constellation, and it's easy to spot because it contains the bright star Vega. Now, Vega is almost directly overhead in the summer. You'll have to wait to August to be able to see it well. Well, if any of you saw Contact, the film with Jodie Foster, or read the novel by Carl Sagan, you might remember that she goes off to Vega. This is the star. But the most interesting object in Lyra, you'll need a telescope to see. It's down here between those two stars. It's called the Ring Nebula. And it's obvious why. It looks like a huge smoke ring. And this is what the sun will look like billions of years from now. Now, I told you I'd show you how the sun will die. Well, this is it. What's happened here is that this star has swollen up into a red giant, and it's become so large that its outer layers have literally become detached and drifted off into space. And the colors show the different temperatures of the gas, from hottest at the center to coolest farthest out. And it's all part of the great cosmic recycling process. And at the very center of the ring, you can see the core of the former red giant left behind as what's called a white dwarf, very small and hot. And when the sun swells into a red giant, the Earth's atmosphere and oceans will boil away, and then the rocks will begin to glow and melt. This is global warming in the extreme. And here's the scene imagined for us by the British space artist David Hardy, with the red giant sun filling the sky and molten lava running over the Earth's surface. So modern astronomy tells us that the Earth will end in fire. but that's not going to happen for a few billion years yet. The sun's currently about halfway through its allotted lifespan, so no need to worry for now. Well, we're on to our last chapter now, and everyone should know this one. It's Ursa Major, the Great Bear, although the bit that everybody knows best, the 7 stars that make up the shape popularly termed the Plough or the Big Dipper, is only a small part of the whole thing. Now, there are a couple of stories to explain who the bear is. One says it's the nymph Callisto. Now, she was another of Zeus's fancies, and we see him up in the clouds watching her. Now we're back to this business of Greek and Roman names again. The artist has given him the Roman name Jupiter, but as we know, he was Zeus to the Greeks. Well, Callisto was a follower of Artemis, the goddess of hunting, who, as we've already seen, the Romans called Diana. Well, if Zeus had disguised himself as an animal, Callisto might have shot him. So instead, he came down to her in the form of Artemis herself. Now, in this painting, we can see that it's really Zeus because there's Zeus's eagle in the background carrying one of his thunderbolts in its claws. But Callisto didn't suspect anything until it was too late and Zeus had ravished her. Well, this was terrible because she had sworn a vow of chastity to Artemis. Well, Callisto kept the secret until a hot afternoon some months later when Artemis, or Diana, and a hunting party came to a cool stream and decided to bathe. Now, the Renaissance artists were always very good at catching nymphs just as they were getting undressed and having a bath, but in this case, we see that Callisto is reluctant to join in, and the other girls are undressing her to discover her bump. Well, horror of horrors, she'd broken her vow of chastity. This was a sackable offense. So Diana banished her from the group. Later, Callisto gave birth to a son called Arcas. Now, there's no agreement about who turned Callisto into a bear. One story says Zeus did it to conceal Callisto from his wife's revenge, while others say Zeus's wife herself did it out of jealousy. But whatever the case, when Arcas had grown up into a man, he was out hunting one day when he encountered the bear. Well, understandably, he didn't recognize it was actually his mother, and he was about to kill it when Zeus saved her by spiriting them both up into heaven. Callisto as the great bear, and Arcas as the constellation Boötes, the herdsman, who's visualized as driving the bear around the pole, holding his 2 hunting dogs on a leash, as we see here. And this is Ursa Major as it appears in the sky. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the section we know as the Plough or the Big Dipper is only a small part of it, and overall the resemblance to a bear isn't very convincing. Well, as all good scouts know, 2 stars in the bowl of the Dipper point to the North Pole star Polaris, and the pointers are the 2 stars furthest from the handle. And if you extend the line between them, you'll come to the North Pole star, Polaris, which is at the tip of the tail of the little bear, Ursa Minor. Now, Polaris isn't exactly at the pole, but it's near enough, and it's an easy way of getting your bearings at night. And it's just by chance that we happen to have a moderately bright star near the North Celestial Pole. There's no similar star at the South Pole. Now, there's something slightly different about the second star along the handle of the Plough. It's actually a twin star. The second star is fainter, but you can just about see it if you've got good eyesight or good specs, and it's dead easy through binoculars. And the 2 stars are called Mizar and Alcor. So have a look for that next time you're looking at the Plough. Now, there's one other object in this area I want to point out to you. It's a galaxy, and it's down here near the end of the Dipper's handle. And this is what it looks like through the Hubble Space Telescope. It's called the Whirlpool Galaxy, and it's a beautiful spiral of billions of stars seen almost face on. It's about 10 times farther from us than the Andromeda Galaxy, but because it's face on, it's much easier to see the structure. And there's a smaller companion at the end of one of its spiral arms, and this may actually be merging with the whirlpool. Now, the man who named this the whirlpool was the same man who gave the Crab Nebula its name, the Irish astronomer Lord Rosse. And in 1845, he built what was then the world's largest telescope at his castle at Birr in central Ireland, and it was through this that he saw the spiral shape of the whirlpool. And this discovery was the first step in proving that objects like this were not just clouds of gas relatively nearby, as had previously been thought, but were separate Milky Ways full of stars. And now we know that there are endless numbers of galaxies like this stretching throughout space as far as the largest telescopes can see. So I hope I've been able to show you that the ancient myths live on, and you can see them every night illustrated in the sky. And thanks to the discoveries of modern astronomy, we also have our own stories of the stars that are every bit as astounding as the myths of old. Colourful gas clouds spawning clusters of stars, monstrous red giants and shrunken white dwarfs, pulsars, black holes, and colliding galaxies. But these stories have the added power of truth and the added fascination that they're still being written and rewritten as new discoveries are made. Well, that's the end of my story for this evening. But if you want to find out more about the mythology of these and all the constellations, you can go to my website at ianridpath.com and click on the third button down on the right, marked Star Tales, and that will take you to a whole separate part of the website with lots of pages about all the constellations, both the current ones and obsolete ones as well. So it's time to hand back to you now, Roy.
Thank you, Ian. That really enjoyed that. I think I've seen that before, and every time I pick up more and more each time. It's fantastic. I've also shared a link to your Wikipedia page as well, because it's got some book links on there as well, and some kind of great information about things you've achieved. And UFOs seems to figure quite highly in your history as well. So yeah. Questions have been being asked, and actually you answered a lot of them in your talk. So like, how long is the sun going to last and what's going to happen to it and things like that. We have had people ask about star law and if it's different in different cultures, and I was going to just spend a couple of minutes opening up Stellarium and showing people that a bit more, maybe in about 5 or 10 minutes time, just for about a minute, just to show people that they can load that up and see what other cultures see as well.
Yes, Stellarium actually has a very good section about mythology in various cultures, but I've mostly concentrated on the Greek and Roman ones because they're the stories behind the constellations that we know. But of course, other cultures had different constellations. The Chinese had a completely different set of constellations. They had over 200 of them. And they were very small, some of them only individual stars, and a lot of them very faint. But they were more interested in astrology than astronomy.
I don't really like it when I get called an astrologer.
No, I'd walk out.
Yeah, the North. If you go to Stellarium, I'll show people in a second. If you go to Stellarium, one of the most interesting ones is North Korea. You can look at the North Korean constellations. And there's a lot of stuff about diplomacy and various officers and organizational things, which is cool as well.
Well, the Japanese and Korean constellations are very similar to the Chinese ones, actually. The Chinese influence was very great.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So yeah, I also I've got one of your books somewhere, the universe one. I've got so many space books. I tried to find it before. I've got a sneaking suspicion my daughter, who's 5, has it in her room somewhere. But I also
she's not using it as a colouring book.
No. I also wanted just to show this one as well. This is a good one. It's not yours, but I'm sure you won't mind sharing a screen with Sir Patrick Moore, the late great Sir Patrick Moore. A lot of what Ian has talked about tonight, in addition to his own books, is in here as well, and that's a fantastic book too. So questions on top of that. I think we've answered all of them, Ian. Lots of thank yous. Many people are saying thank you. Quite a few people have said they've not actually seen the constellations and the imagery before overlaid on top of each other, and the artwork. So that's great. Thank you for that. Stellarium, Yvette, that is how it's spelt. Yes. So let me see if I can share my Stellarium screen. Share screen. Stellarium. Oh, we didn't hear your sound, by the way. And when I've looked on the share screen window, there's a little click box in the bottom left that says share sound. So when you did show your, I know it worked for us in the practice run, but when you showed it that slide to the people, we didn't see that. So or hear it. We saw it, but we didn't hear it.
Okay, it didn't go out on YouTube. Perhaps you heard it. Did you hear it?
No. Which I don't get, because we practiced that and it worked.
Yeah.
But it's something that people should definitely look up and check.
Yes. I had read somewhere that there's an extra button, but I've never found it.
I've just seen it now, completely quite by accident.
I don't have it. You must have it. You must need it.
Oh, okay.
I don't have that.
Well, let's not worry about that too much.
Anyway, so sorry, folks. If you, I put that in to wake you up. So
yeah, it didn't work. They were already awake, Ian. There's 350 of them, and they were all chatting and looking.
Yeah.
So just if you download Stellarium, there's a couple of things you can do. One of them is you can click this button and turn on the constellation art, so you can see it for yourself as you go around and you look at various things. There's Orion, there's Taurus. And where's the Pleiades? Oh, they're in there. The Pleiades is the face of Taurus. So let's just turn that off for a second. If you want to see constellations in other countries or culture star lore, you need to go to Sky and Viewing Options window. Don't worry, people, if you're missing this. This is being recorded and it will be available on the YouTube channel. There's all these different options up here which are great to play about with, but the one you want is star lore. And you see we're on Western there, and if you change to Arabic or Babylonian, there are a lot of similarities, like Ian was saying. But if you want to have some real strange fun, you want to go
Sami one. Will you go for the Sami one? One from
Sami.
Autumn.
I was going to go for Korea, but I've not seen Sami before, so let's have a look at that.
Oh, yeah. These we used to call them the laps, but that's now considered a derogatory term. So
okay.
Call them the Sami instead.
Oh, look, the ski runners. You've got the ski runners. You've got an elk.
Yeah.
Sava the elk.
Sava the elk. Now, that's a huge concept. Being reindeer herders, can you turn the constellations back on or the stars back on, or any pictures back on? No. Anyway,
no, it won't show you the elk for that.
Being reindeer herders, reindeer and elks, Sava, I think it was a reindeer, but being reindeer herders, reindeer are really a pretty big thing in the Sami way of life. And Sava the elk is actually made up of 4 of our constellations. There's Auriga, the charioteer is its hind legs, Perseus is its front legs. Then you imagine its neck going up to Cassiopeia, which is its head, and Cepheus is its antlers. So there's this giant.
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, this giant reindeer, or here it says elk, but you can think of it either, in the sky. And they have this scene, this hunting scene, which goes on night after night of the hunters trying to track down the reindeer and
never quite getting there. But look at this. This is Korean, and I love it. It's so interesting. You know, there is kitchens and officers and flag of wines and emperors and the dung of tiger. That's an interesting one. The dung of tiger. The jail of the sky. The judge prison. Somewhere in Korean sky mythology, there is a toilet of the sky as well. And I can never find it. I always find it when I'm not looking for it, but when I'm looking for it in a talk, I can never find it.
Yeah, it's in Lepus, just under Orion.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well,
yeah.
I know where Orion is.
You've lost Orion.
There it is. Oh, that was right there at the beginning. So there's Orion, called Sam.
No,
toilet
I
of the
don't know
sky
why
there.
they call it that. Yes, but that's it. Yes. And there's a screen just to the right of it for modesty.
Yes, it's good, isn't it? Lovely. Well, anyway, I just very quickly show that to people. They can look back at that as and when they see fit. We still have 300 viewers. Al Williams, lots of people are saying, what's that website? It's Stellarium. Al, we have had quite a lot of questions, but Al Williams, if you've got any final questions, or if anybody else has any final questions they want to just fire in, I think we can probably stretch Ian's time by maybe 5 minutes if we're lucky, but it has
Yeah,
got
I'm still here. Is there anywhere? Well, look, if you've got a burning question, you can email me on ian@ianridpath.com in any case, and I'll try and get on to those in the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
So, do contact me directly if you want.
That's a really kind offer, Ian. Thank you very much. The website, Al Williams, just to reiterate, is Stellarium. Stellarium. I'll just type that in.
Yeah, it's free, isn't it, as well? It's a European development, and they're always improving it, and you can download it free.
And Ian's is ianridpath.com. So I've just put both of those in the chat, Ian.
Thank you.
There don't appear to be any questions that we haven't answered. So unless I see any questions appear in the next few minutes, I think that would be a good time to call it a night. Have you done your star count this week? Did you manage to get out on a clear night?
No, I haven't. Well, there's no chance of doing it tonight, but
no.
we have had some clear nights, but I live in West London anyway. I'm 10 miles from Heathrow.
Oh, okay.
So, I've got Syon Park next door and Kew Gardens the other side of the river, but there's an awful lot of light pollution. So I can see the belt of Orion.
If you get binoculars, can you see the nebula?
The Orion Nebula.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Well, yes. On a good night, you can just about see the haziness with the naked eye. But the North American Nebula, which I mentioned in Cygnus, I've never found it a binocular object, even under really very dark skies. So maybe that's something that you can show people through your telescopes. Take CCD pictures of it.
Yeah. We did have a couple of talks last night on deep sky imaging. So if anybody's interested in that, just click back and look at and you can rewatch that as well. What I found, so I live in Gateshead, although I work in the observatory that we founded, the Battlesworth Observatory, and in fact in 2013-14 I was working at Kielder, so right in the dark sky park. And there you can see things so easily. What I found is, so if you come from Andromeda and you kind of go down, is it M33 that's kind of opposite? Is it M33?
M33 is in Triangulum. This is
Galaxy.
The Galaxy M33, yes, in Triangulum.
Yeah, and people say they can see that naked eye in a really dark sky, but I never have been able to.
You're too old, mate.
Oh. Yeah.
You need sharp young eyes, but it may be that you're looking for something too compact. It's actually very diffuse. It has a very low surface brightness. Well, you should be able to find it in binoculars.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give that a go the next time we're allowed to travel beyond the boundaries of the town. I am impressed that you showed us Andromeda and the double cluster, because I often try to, and I'm going to leave you all with this, I think, because we've had no more questions apart from one from Jason Webb, which is, what are your favorite things to look at in the sky and why? Mine's the moon, but also I do love to look at the double cluster and Andromeda, the ones that you showed, and even where I am in Gateshead on a good clear night, and it has to be a good night, I can see those. I can just about make them out, and if I get my binoculars out on them, I can see them really quite easily. I mean, not as great as if we were under dark skies, but people should appreciate that wherever they are, no matter what their levels of light pollution, if they give themselves the right opportunities, they can see these things.
Yes, and the important thing is to remember to get dark adapted. Don't expect to see it after you go straight out. You've got to wait 10 minutes.
Definitely. So I've just answered that question. What's my favorite thing to look at in the sky? And it's the moon for me. Ian, what's your last question? Ian, what's your favorite thing to look at in the night sky?
Well, I think the Pleiades, if he's talking deep sky objects, then I think the Pleiades has to be the best. But my real favorite is actually the Northern Lights, but I go up to Norway to look at that.
Yeah, you need to travel.
And that's a different talk. That's another talk.
That's a whole different talk. We have a talk on the Northern Lights this week. It's I think it's on Friday, so that would be interesting. I don't know if any people keep noticing, but I've got That's the Pleiades. That's Galileo's sketch of the Pleiades on.
Yes, I
Orion.
recognize it. I recognize it.
So I actually do quite like the Pleiades as well. Right. So I think that's answered those questions. We are getting some other questions now on things like other universes and UFOs and stuff. But I think it's time to say thank you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I would like to bid you a good night, and no doubt our paths will cross again. I'll definitely try and find where my daughter's put your book. And we really value and appreciate your time and your expertise. And thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. And for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, if you want to have a look at everything else that we're doing this week, just stay on the YouTube channel, but look into our playlists. There are several more talks happening. And if you didn't get your questions answered tonight about are there parallel universes and things like that, join one of those chats and ask us the question there. Okay, but for now, take care and you enjoy.